Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy that you joined the topic on secure encrypted data communication. Sorry, it's the start. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Annette Kempf. I'm the CEO of Eclipsina, and we are specialized in charging in terms of different topics, whether it's test system, but it's also training. But of course, you joined for getting an information on the topic which we communicated, and this is encrypted charging communication. I will not do this talk completely on my own. I will start with the general topics on encryption and TLS and so on. And then I will hand over to the technical expert, Bernd Baranski. So if we are talking about encrypted charging communication, we talk about secure communication, encryption, and so on. And the protocol used for this is TLS. TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. And it's a cryptographic protocol. And it's designed to provide communication security over a network. So meaning from if you have several computers or several devices, to have communication which is secure from one or many devices to other devices. The TLS protocol is widely used in many applications, for example, in email, also in instant messaging, for telephone, it's very important, voice over IP. The most common use and where most people are also know it from is for web pages or other things with HTTPS communication. And of course, it's also used in the charging communication between the electric vehicle, EV, and the charging station, EVSE. So what is the target of the TLS protocol? The TLS protocol has different aims, and this is to provide security. So, and this even includes privacy, to say the data stays confidential. Then the integrity is very important, meaning that data is not changed, yeah, and authenticity. And all this is achieved through cryptography by the use of certificates where two or more devices, computers, are communicating with each other. Looking at TLS, many might even know SSL, and the term is still widely used because especially for web pages, you might know the SSL keys. So the first published protocol was SSL, and then the was replaced by TLS. Here you see the versions which I derived from Wikipedia with this table. Currently valid is TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.3. I highlighted the TLS 1.2 in brighter green because this is what's widely used and where we will look also at in the following pages, because of course they have different properties and changed over time, and this would be too much for this talk right now. Yeah. Now we come to the OSI model. Why the OSI model? This is an ISO standard for communication. And of course, it's also used in charging communication, but it's was mainly defined also for network communication. And it's a conceptual model for networks protocols. And it's, as you can see, it consists of 7 layers. And it's supposed to enable communication across different technical systems. And in the case of a communication, these layers have to be passed by the transmitter and the receiver. So you start with the application layer, and then you go down step by step until the physical layer. Then you have a physical connection to the other device, meaning a cable or whatever. Yeah. And then the receiver has the different layers to handle the data, meaning to pack. As the transmitter is packing, encrypting, receiver is handling these packages, first decrypt and then handling all the data, putting it to the right place. So there are different layers which have each their functionality, which is clearly defined. And you have certain protocols which are located in different layers. And in the next slide, we see where we are looking at in charging communication, and there the SLAC protocol is clearly defined. Maybe most of you already heard. And the SLAC protocol and communication is in the physical and data link layer, meaning there you really have the cable and the data going from one device to the other device. And in then the upper layers, for you have a B2G communication, which is also defined in the ISO 15118, which is doing the communication on the software level. Yeah, this is software only. Hardware is not involved. And within this V2G stack, you find also the TLS protocol. And the TLS protocol is in the 4th layer in the transport layer. You can find this, so that you have a view where it's located within this standard. So the TLS 1.2 has new the secure hash algorithm 2. 256 key, and this is new. Before it was MD5 SHA1 combination in a pseudo-random function, and this was now replaced with this secure hash algorithm key 256. In general, the definition for secure hash algorithm 2, it consists of hash functions which can have different values. So it's possible to have 224, 256, 384 or 512 bits. We are now looking at 256 bit because this is TLS 1.2 and also in the charging communication according to ISO 15118. Then now we take more or less a step back. Yeah, we are getting from like the general concepts which we discussed before with this ISO standard for the OSI layer and the TLS. Now we are looking in general topics again, encryption, but within this communication, it's one detail. And encryption is all about transmitting information in a way that it only can be read and by the sender and the receiver. And if anybody is like spying the data in between, they are and taking a copy or sniffing it, they shall not be able to decrypt it. There are different mechanisms, methods to do encryption, and they are divided in different categories. So you can have symmetric, you can have asymmetric, and you can hybrid encryption methods. The most common mechanisms include the symmetric encryption method, Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, and RSA. We'll now look into do a sneak peek into the Advanced Encryption Standard. Before doing this, also a remark, we have done e-learnings. Altogether, it's a course composed of 6 e-learning units on cryptography. And if you look at the time there, it's 20 hours of learning time. So you need to really understand about encryption, how the different methods and working and so on. You need 20 hours of time to invest this time to learn it. And the content of this training is like basics, then older methods, which are more easy to understand. Then the concept of Alice and Bob, and also the different roles are introduced. Then you have a different methods, symmetric, asymmetric, and so on. And then you have different encryption methods in detail described. Now we'll have just a sneak peek into some of the content of this e-learning. For the symmetric encryption, we see Alice and Bob. So these are the two devices or people talking to each other. This is a concept which is commonly used. So if you talk about encryption, you usually talk about Alice and Bob. And here you see the concept of symmetric encryption. And in case of a symmetric encryption, here Alice wants to send a message to Bob. And Alice writes her message and uses a key to encrypt it, and sends then the secret message to Bob, who uses the same key. This is the thing about symmetric encryption, the same key to decrypt the message. And this sounds very easy and a logical message, but there's the topic, what is done with the key and how is the key handling done. So this is the most, this is the common problem which needs to be solved for the symmetric encryption. Yeah. So we really have this key exchange problem. Yeah. And the question is, how can Bob obtain the key from Alice? So the sequencing of a key is crucial for the security of a method. And if you look at the secure communication channel, this would be nice to say, okay, I can send the key via secure communication channel. But the problem is that, or the thing is, if you have a really secure channel, then you would not need encryption anymore. Yeah. Or you would say, okay, I encrypt the key for the encryption, but then you have a recursive problem, because then you would need another key for encrypting and decrypting, and this key also would have the same thing. So this is not possible. So more or less you have to find a way that only Alice and Bob get the key, nobody else. And then, which we see in the next slide, the number of communication partners will increase. So in here, you really say, okay, Alice and Bob are talking to each other. Alice and Bob have the same key. As soon as you have 3 people, you need 3 keys. If you have 4 people, you already need 6 keys. If you have 5 people, you already need 10 keys. For charging communication, this is not an issue at all, because we have EV and EVSE, so we have the same situation like we saw before with Alice and Bob. So only the 2 members need to have the key. In these concepts, what are the advantages of this symmetric communication? Usually, the encryption functions are not as complex as for other encryption methods. The implementation is relatively easy, and the hardware requirements, for charging stations and vehicles where you have not so much computing power, it's still a lot, but in comparison to other algorithms, the hardware requirements are relatively low. And it's an easy and efficient increase of a security level. The disadvantages is clearly this key exchange problem. This is a big disadvantage. And the quickly rising number of keys does not apply in terms of EV and EVSE communication, as we are not having like 5 or 10 different devices, PCs connected to it. So we clearly have a one-to-one communication. If we look then into the advanced encryption standard AES, what process applies? It's an application of different transformations over the course of several rounds. So you have not just one transformation, you have several steps, and you have several rounds, and the number of rounds depends on the key length. So if you have a key length of 128 bits, you need 10 rounds. If you have 192 bits, then you need 12 rounds. And if you have, like in our case, 256 bits, then you need 14 rounds to encrypt the message. And how do these rounds look like? First, we start with our plaintext. And this is added to the round key knull. And we are an exclusive OR operation. Then the first round starts, and it consists of 4 steps. The single rounds can be labeled as substitution permutation network, since it is the first step. Bytes are substituted, and in the second and third step, permuted. Those 4 steps are repeated every round, with the exception of the last round where the third step is missing, since it would not have any effect. After the according number of rounds, like we said 14, you obtain your ciphertext. And you should know that the operation is inverse, so this is becomes important when it's decryption is done. So for my part, I'm finished now, and I will hand over to the expert Bernd Baranski, who will provide an overview on the specific charging relevant topics. And I'm very happy that you're joining me, and thank you for your support, Bernd. And I'm happy to listen to your part of a presentation.
Yeah, very warm. Thank you, Annette. I'm Bernd Baranski. I'm one of the writing members of the ISO 15118, and since approximately 8 years, I'm involved in charging communication techniques, as I do consulting and development help for all charging issues and problems, and what is on the market available. I did a lot of jobs for several companies. Some of you may already know me, but Annette has started for the theoretical part of encryption, and I now try to explain a little bit about the difficulties if you have encryption communication, and or if you want to develop it, where you could have some issues, problems, and things like that. So first of all, I want to step back a little bit into the charging communication. we have an end-to-end connection in the TCP. We have connection-orientated communication. We have a flow control, overload control, and an error handling. But in Germany or in Europe, we have two valid norms, which is the DIN norm and the ISO norm. And I'd like to bring up a mismatch between these both. I don't want to go through all the ISO layers from 1 to 8 and explain again how the general stack is working and so on. So I assume that you have prepared or you be prepared before listening to our presentation here, that you know already how the stack and the communication in general is working. So one of the steps is that the EV has to find the SECC, which is the software server inside of the charging spot. If you read the norm, these SECC can be anywhere, somewhere in the world via internet connected and so on. But for our presentation and also for most of the cases we know, the SECC is really based inside of the charging spot. The SECC has also the possibility to talk to the backend, to get information from the backend, and is the communication partner for the EV. So we have here now already a linked connection between EV and SECC. And now the next step is to open the TCP port. For this action, the EV needs to choose either if it is encrypted the communication or not. Just to explain, in the ISO norm, ISO 15118, it's possible to have encrypted and not encrypted in communication. In the DIN, it's clearly not encrypted. So we have here a short dead end, or a possibility for a dead end, because the EV doesn't know if the charging spot is able to do DIN, ISO not encrypted, and ISO encrypted. So the EV does not know what communication is available on the SECC side, but it needs to decide now to do encryption or not. So let's assume the EV wants to have encryption and the SECC is just a simple DIN, or not simple, but it's a DIN based communication SECC. So the EV sends the message, please open an encrypted TCP channel, and the SECC doesn't check the encryption or no encryption bit, because for the DIN it is don't care. So the answer is, all right, open the TCP port. The EV is opening the TCP port, sending the next message encrypted, and the SECC can't decrypt because encryption is not available, because the choice of encryption and norm is done in the next message. So there's a dead end. But this is just beside the way, because this is one of the problems we have in the charging communication if we want to use encryption. So as Annette already told us, in this layer, the TLS and TCP communication is done. And I now want to step a little bit into the communication itself. So what do we have here? We have a connection. Let's assume we have a connection with TLS, and the charging spot, the SECC, is also able to encrypt and decrypt with TLS. Due to the fact that we have a symmetric encryption, it might be possible that somebody has stolen the private key, so that he is able to decrypt the messages. To protect the messages from being encrypted, we use root certificates. You can imagine a certificate is something like, if you have a very old style letter, a handwritten letter, and you don't want, or you want to protect this from being opened in the transport on the post way, you put a plug of wax on this letter, and then your partner who receives the letter can see that the wax is not broken, it's sealed, so nobody has opened it on the transport way. So that's the same mechanism. It works with the root certificate. Okay, certificate's a bit more complex, but nevertheless, this is the mechanism. So that means you have the encrypted message, and the root certificate is a signature on it, so that on the way to the SECC, this message is never been opened. The SECC has a look at the certificate and says, okay, it is still sealed, so the message is fine, and I can use this message because it's clearly from the EV, nobody has seen it. And the opposite way around, so the SECC is encrypting the answer, putting the seal on it, send it back. The EV can check the seal, say everything is fine, and then open it. So for the certificates, or let's say to test these part of the communication, the TLS communication, there are not so many cases where we can test. We have a connection between EV and EVSE. We have a secure TLS channel. If this is working, then we are half the way through. There is no possibility for the software guys to have let's say a maybe working software or a part-time working software. So if the connection is encrypted and the encryption is working, it's fine. If not, you can't, or doesn't matter which side, the SECC, which is under development for TLS, can't encrypt. Then you need really from software side to work as long on the software, on the source codes, as long you need to get an encrypted signal. It's a go or no go decision. If encryption is working, then it's fine. And if it is not working, it's not working. There's no way in between. Yeah. So what happened in the TLS layer? It's, let's say, we have a few steps. So we have the first step, which is EV and SECC. They say hello to each other, so they are connected. Then there's a certificate exchange, and also the EV certificate exchange. The certificate content is checked, and also the valid date for the certificate is checked. And at the end, the cipher communication is running, and then communication is finished. So why it is important to test the TLS encryption? It's clear, if you do not test the communication, you will have difficulties in the field. That's clear. But even to test the TLS encryption is tricky, because you have a test system, for example, but you need to have the right key and the right certificate for your device under test. So you need really to get some information from your customer, and also in the running process. So for example, you develop a car, and the car goes to a charging spot who is able to do encryption, and now something went wrong during the charging process. You are not able to decode all the messages. You can just log the messages, but you can't decode it to find where the problem is coming from. So if you have encrypted communication, it's very hard to get the clear text out of it for the testing and development. Okay, but yeah. I started with the certificate. So the administrative problem here is that the customer has to give the certificate and also the right key to the company who is testing for the customer the device. So we need to have a ensured handling of the certificates to exchange them with the customer, and also for the device under test, we need to check that everything is right implemented and so on. So there are a lot of difficulties with the administrative, but also the technical setup. We need to have the right implementation of TLS. As Annette already said, we have different versions of TLS, so we need to have the right one. Otherwise, it's not working. And when we have problems in the encrypted communication, it's very difficult to find where it's coming from. And also, we have a high effort and have a lot of we need a lot of time to set up just the test environment, to get the keys, to make sure that the keys are secure stored, to set up the keys in the right function of the software, and all these is a high effort. But if the system is running, the test system, according to the device under test, we have only a few possible test cases. Because you can't test the function of the key. Yes, you can just check, okay, you have a good key, it's working, and you use a wrong key, it's not working. That's all. But what you can test is the handling of the certificates, because in the norm is written, the both devices, EV and EVSE, has to have the storage for 10 different certificates. So you can check the handling of the certificates. If you modify the certificate, if it's out of date, it needs to be updated, so the updating mechanism can be checked. You can try to have a man-in-the-middle attack, where you can really open the message and close it again and see if the EVSE is checking the misuse of the certificate. And this test cases for 10 different certificates, so that you have, for example, 2 different charging spots, 1 car, 2 different cars, 1 charging spot, and so on, so on. So that you have the combination of out of these 4 test cases with 10 different certificates. That's a lot of tests at all in number, but it's only 4 different cases. So I think we are already at the end, because there is, for me, I do not have a lot more to say to the testing at all, because the test cases itself, it's not that much we have. And I hope I could help a little bit, or I could bring you on track for this testing and certificate and encryption. We are happy to tell you all this, and if you want to have more information, please check our e-learnings. There's a lot of more details here for testing and things. So yeah, have a nice day.